Hello, my friend. Looking at your toes, looking at your chart, I'm super excited to do this Astro Toe reading for you, and then also later on this week do a full natal chart reading. So in toe reading, your left foot represents the internal self, your connection with source, the way that you talk to yourself, the way that you take action for yourself, and just kind of your internal landscape. Your right foot is all about what's happening externally, how you interact with the outside world, how the outside world receives you and perceives you, and your experience outside of yourself. Time tracks in the toes. What's happening up here in the top of the toe is more recent. And then as you move back here towards the toe, this is from earlier in life, even before you're born generationally. Each of the toes represents an energy, and your left big toe is your spirit path toe. Your right big toe is your life path toe. And then each of the other toes has the same, just depending on if it's internally or externally focused. And this is expression and communication, your second toes. Third toes are action. Fourth toes are relationships, and fifth toes are prosperity and trust. And so when I'm looking at your toes, I'm gathering the messages that your toes are sharing. Toes are our first messengers. They connect with the earth. What's happening in the toes is an indicator of what's happening and will be happening in our body, mind, and spirit. If you think about a map of your life, that's what the star chart is, your natal chart here. This is a snapshot of the sky when you were born, at the very moment you were born. And so that's the map. But on any map, if you don't know where you're starting from, it doesn't make the map very effective. And so the toes are one of the ways that we can really look at where are you now in your life journey. And then I'll tie it into your natal chart. In this particular reading, I will show some things in the natal chart. And most of this reading is going to be all about the toes, because I know that we have our astrology reading later on this week. Okay, so with that, the first thing that I noticed when I looked at your toes is how much personal work you have done. When I see toes like yours, I wish I could see like toes 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. When I see toes that just show so much inner work that has been done. Let me tell you what I see in your toes so that you see what I mean. You don't have very much blocked energy in your toes. You do have some, so you can see what I'm talking about. You have some here in your communication expression toes. You can just see that with, well, we mostly see it with our energetic eyes, but when I point out, you can just see how these toes, there's just a little bit more puffiness to them, a little more inflammation. Whereas these other toes, you've really done a great deal of work in your life. So I want to congratulate you and just let you know what an honor it is to read the toes of somebody who's been involved in the work for a long, long time. The second thing that I really noticed in your toes is your intuition. This space between your second and your first toe is the channel of your intuition. And I also know that there is greater access to your intuition that you can gain in a relatively short period of time. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So you're already just super highly intuitive, and knowing what I know about you, having access to more intuition, to greater intuition, to clearer intuition, to higher frequency intuition is important to you and interesting to you. Okay, so we'll start there. So these first big toes, like I said, this is your spirit path and this is your life path. Now, we can see that these toes, of all the toes, these are the ones that are pointing the most here in this other direction. Meaning instead of going straight, and they're not super bent to the sides, but they could be more straight. And this is really coming from this space where you are very service oriented, and sometimes you sacrifice yourself for others. Sometimes you quote unquote bend over backwards to keep the peace. Sometimes you don't speak your mind or your heart because it might be disruptive. And I sense this especially with close relationships. And you are a very independent person. These toes standing here on their own shows a great deal of independence. And what I would invite you to do, this callousing that you have here on the outside of the toes, this is self-protection. I would invite you to re-examine the stories, perceptions, experiences that you have that you may need to just peel back a few more layers on to release the walls of protection that you feel you need to build. These walls of protection that you're building are actually blocking some of your intuition, the access to some of your intuition. Also, with this pattern of bending over backwards or self-sacrificing for others is also actually keeping you stuck there. And here we go. When I have a physical reaction, like a clearing of the throat, a yawn, a sneeze, sometimes I get tears, that's because I've hit on something. So I invite you to consider how that's resonating with you and what are some additional layers that you can peel back around that, because we obviously, it's natural to protect ourselves, especially when we've experienced hurt, pain, betrayal. And what your toes are telling me is that it's time to re-examine and release. Re-examine and release. And a time frame is coming up, and that is during the Venus retrograde that we have coming up later on this year. I don't remember the exact dates of the Venus retrograde, but I will get those to you, and I'll have them when we have our one-on-one astrology. I'm just looking at your Venus in your chart. It was not retrograde when you were born. Okay. But yeah, during the Venus retrograde is going to be a time of great release for you around some of these relationship patterns. I believe it happens in June, but I will let you know for sure. Okay, so re-examining and releasing. And something that you can do to help move this along is to gently push out here and in here. Same thing, out at the top, in here, and getting some oil or some lotion and just rubbing those calluses while asking yourself, what is ready to be released now? What walls have I put up to protect myself that are not serving me now? Obviously, they served you at one time, but they're not serving you now. And then what will happen when you do this is these toes are going to start tracking forward. So as you gently push and massage, also inviting the energy to track forward, you're going to receive massive amounts of intuition. And your spirit path and your life path are going to come into even greater alignment. Your feeling of duty to sacrifice yourself for others will lessen. Now, sacrificing self for others is sometimes necessary, especially as mothers. And sometimes that just becomes a pattern because, the powers that be in our world, they want people to sacrifice themselves for others. We see this in the workforce. We see this in family dynamics. We see this in all sorts of organizations that promote and reward for self-sacrifice. And our own ego rewards us for this because we feel like we're being unselfish. So there's more layers here for you to identify around that. And then looking at rethinking again during this Venus retrograde that's going to come up, that just keeps coming into my mind. Rethinking, where are you in your spirit path and in your life path? And what does it look like to change that? One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about in your chart is Chiron. Chiron is the wounded healer in Greek mythology. Chiron had experienced the abandonment, betrayal, being hurt by friend, those kinds of wounds. He used those wounds to become the healer, and was the trainer of heroes and the greatest healer in the world because he couldn't heal his own wound. But because he could have the compassion that comes by knowing what the wound is, and then having compassion so that we can help people. In the Bible, it talks about Jesus having compassion. So there's compassion, sympathy, empathy, and pity. So most people don't want to be pitied and don't enjoy feeling pity. That's an ego-based emotion. Empathy gets a lot of, empathy is pretty popular, right? I'm so empathetic. I have empathy. I feel empathy for you. And it's sometimes used in a context that I don't think we mean. Empathy is like seeing someone in the bottom of a pit and you jump on in with them. So then you know how it feels. Like you're letting yourself feel those energetic feels, but now you're just both in the pit and there's not a way to get out. So great, you've got company there in that empathetic pit, but you don't have a way to get out of that. Okay, so that's empathy. And then we have sympathy. Sympathy is when you have an intellectual understanding of what somebody is going through, combined with empathy, so you're feeling it. But remember, even empathy is our own projection of our feelings, or our own, those feelings going through our own filters. So sympathy is having that, but not having actually experienced it. And so that I see sympathy as being someone who will toss down a rope. Here, have this rope, to the person who's in the pit of despair. Here's a rope. I have sympathy. I feel it, but I'm staying up here. I'm staying out of the pit because I can help you more up here, or simply because I have self-control, so I don't allow myself to just jump down into the pit. And then we have compassion. Compassion is when we know what it is because we have experienced it. Our entire body knows what it is to feel whatever that is. And so I'm speaking again here about your wound, which is in Aquarius. And I'm going to ask you some questions here in a moment. But when you have compassion, that, going back to the analogy, that is when you give someone the materials to build a ladder. The person in the pit, you give them the materials to build the ladder to climb out of the pit on their own. So they are empowered. They're not being pulled out by a rope. They're learning skills of building their own way out. And we can offer that to people because we have compassion, because we've been in the pit and we built our ladder and we got out of the pit. So I think you understand those 4 levels. So that would be a question to ask yourself is, am I responding in this way in a way of pity, empathy, sympathy, or compassion. Now, when your wound is in the sign of Aquarius, and I want to just point out that you've got a connection between your wound of Chiron in Aquarius and the ruler of Aquarius, which is Uranus, here across the chart. You've got this opposition line. And we'll talk more about that in your astrological reading, but they are definitely connected. All right. So some of the questions, and these would be great journaling questions. Is it safe to change? Is it safe to be different? Is it safe to belong? Is it safe to be an outsider? And is it safe to belong and be different? All right. Some other questions to consider, since the Chiron is in the 12th house here, and that is it safe to be in reality? Is it safe to transcend? Is it safe to be grounded? And I know you've done, like I said at the beginning of this, a lot of work. And so you may even want to go back and reflect on maybe some of these themes came up for you at an earlier place in life and put you on the beautiful life path that you're on now. So one more time to just sum up, rethinking and releasing, reframing and releasing the walls that are no longer serving you, the barriers, the protection. Inviting the energy through intention as well as physical means to invite this toe to move forward in a straight way instead of a leaning way. And then pay attention to what changes in your intuition when you do that. Okay. We're going to skip the second toe because that's where I see the most blocked energy, and we're going to move on, and then we'll come back to it. All right. So your action toes. Okay. Can we talk about your action toes? Your action toes are so nice and straight and pointed forward, and you are a person of action. You are a person that when you say you're going to do something, you do it. You are a person who can be trusted. You are a person who will take the action. And when we look at your Mars here in Pisces, so this is this is an interesting placement because sometimes Pisces can be a little bit scattered, and Mars comes in and can direct it. Taking action is also a very important part of your identity because it's in your first house. And so just being really aware of this action, you're going to be a little bit of a person of extremes in this, where you're either like running after it and taking action, or you're not. And we can see this here in this opposition that you have with Pluto over here in Virgo, and Jupiter makes everything bigger. It is the expander, the exaggerator. And so with that tension that you have there, I would be interested to know how this might show up. Like, you're going to take action, but sometimes do you get burnt out? Do you feel like your fire's been put out? Do you sometimes want to take action or want to do or say something, but you choose not to? Instead, you just go with the flow. There's nothing wrong with that unless it's not what you really wanted to do. If it's what you really wanted to do, but you sacrifice your own desires, because I don't think you'll sacrifice your needs, but you will sacrifice your desires for someone else, just using some questions to find out why you might be doing that. And is it because you want peace? Because you want the harmony? Okay, action toes. Keep taking action. That action is really going to help these big toes. Your relationships. You've done a lot of work on your relationships. And my guess is that you move well in just about any crowd. And sovereignty is really important to you. You get to do, say, think what you want, and you give people the space to do, say, think what they want. And that's a really, really beautiful thing in your relationships. Just make sure that you don't self-sacrifice at your own expense for relationships. And also being aware of who belongs in your space and who does not belong in your space. How are you spending your currencies of time, money, and focus? And are those things that are uplifting you? Because as you fill your own vessel, you can fill others. And I know that you live a life of deep, deep, deep service. So watching yourself, you've still got a lot to do on this planet. Let's talk here about these last toes. These are the trust and prosperity toes. And honestly, these toes look quite healthy, healthier than most trust and prosperity toes. Those are big time generational toes. These could use a little bit of massage, kind of like what you're doing with these toes, except for on this one, you're going to do it in a circular motion, starting at the nail, going down, and kind of coming around in a circle on the way up in this way. On both of these toes, you've lived enough life on the planet that you trust your intuition, you know who to trust, and you know that the universe always has your back and will provide. Okay, let's talk about your communication toes here. Your Mercury, which is the ruler of these second toes, is over here in Sagittarius. And if you look, you've got a lot going on here in Sagittarius. I can't wait to talk more with you about this at the individual reading that we do. But when your Mercury is in Sagittarius and in your 10th house, your voice, your expression, the way that you are communicating with the world, which is where I see the most blocked energy is on this right side, is your destiny. Let me say that again. Your communication is your destiny. All right. Now, Mercury in Sagittarius, it is pretty happy. Mercury in Sagittarius loves to talk about ideas. The thing with Sagittarius is a lot of times Sagittarius will also then take action on those ideas. And you're just super independent. And the way that you interact with others, again, we talk about sovereignty. This is a non-negotiable for you. Your relationships must have sovereignty. And there must be trust there so that you can have that sovereignty. I would really invite you to gently massage these toes, especially this one on the right foot, and asking yourself the question, what is the message I am here to deliver? What is the message that will be at my destiny? Sagittarius is the sign of higher learning, of philosophy, of religion, of long distance travel. What do you want to communicate about those things? I see you as being a bridge, a beautiful bridge between traditional religious belief, which Sagittarius rules, and alternative exploratory ways of tying that together. And how can you communicate this in a more expansive way, in a way that really shares your message with the world? On your chart, if we were to divide it along these bolded lines, above the line, this is external. Below the line is internal. To the left is for you, and to the right is for everyone else. So when we look at the most populated area of this chart, it's definitely this upper half. So this is external work. You are here to bring about change in the world and to do it out there. Okay, this has to do with the communication expression toes. And when we look and we count 1, 2, 3, I'm not counting the goddesses. We'll talk about those when I do your goddess reading. Verses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the outermost quadrant of your natal chart. You are here on this planet to be out in the world and doing your work for others. You've done so much internal work. And when it's for others, it isn't in a self-sacrificing way. It's in a leadership way, which is the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about in these toes. This square that you have here as your toes come down, that's the leadership toe. As you open up these channels of intuition, as you become more clear on what is your messaging, and as you draw together all the things that you have learned, all the work that you have done on yourself and with others, it's going to flow to you. The mission of this part of your life. I know you do a lot with indigenous spiritual work, and that might be influencing the vision that I have, but I just keep seeing you dressed in indigenous style clothing, sitting open and sharing a message with people listening to you. It's been fantastic to do this reading for you, and I look forward to doing the natal chart reading with you later on this week. And until then, massaging these toes, and we'll see you. Thanks.